All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, declares Leo Tolstoy in the opening words of Anna Karenina, a story about a seriously unhappy family. He seems to suggest that happy, functional families all share a certain set of characteristics that make for a harmonious dynamic, whereas unhappy or dysfunctional families can be so because of any number of deficiencies or troubles. This time of year, as relatives gather for vacations and holiday celebrations, many of us might wonder whether we are members of the unhappy families Tolstoy is describing. So it is with great wisdom that the compilers of the Torah made sure that we read the saga of Joseph and his dysfunctional family every November and December. If nothing else, the story might make us feel better about our own families. As you may recall, Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. His brothers resent him and decide to sell him into slavery and tell their father that a wild animal has killed him. Joseph, however, makes his way out of slavery, out of prison, and all the way up to Pharaoh's inner circle, where he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man. When famine drives Joseph's brothers to seek food from Egypt, they end up petitioning Joseph, whom they do not recognize, for help. After a series of dramatic encounters between Joseph and his brothers, a few tests and tricks at his brother's expense, Joseph finally reveals his true identity in this week's parasha, declaring, "I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt." And then he does something remarkable. He forgives his brothers. He lets them off the hook before they even have a chance to make amends. He says, "Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph, who would certainly be justified if he rejected his brothers or took revenge for their cruelty, instead offers absolution. He turns his own life story from one of victimhood into one of redemption. And not just redemption for Joseph, but redemption for his brothers. No wonder the brothers are struck dumb at this revelation. We might wonder why Joseph forgives his brothers so readily. Sure, Joseph has become wealthy and powerful, so perhaps he's just thinking the best revenge is success. Perhaps he feels that his brothers have suffered enough for their sins, given the famine they're enduring, plus the way he has toyed with them in the weeks leading up to this moment. Perhaps Joseph is convinced that his brothers have really changed. Or maybe Joseph is just plain tired. Tired of the hurt and anger, tired of the estrangement, tired of pretending. When he finally tells his brothers the truth, he bursts into tears, weeping so loudly that the Egyptians throughout the palace can hear him. Joseph continues to sob as he embraces and kisses his brothers, assuring them that all is forgiven and urging them to bring their father Jacob to him. As Shefa Gold puts it, Joseph steps out behind the mask of power, the mask of the false self, and weeps aloud. These are the tears of profound relief and of love unbound. Joseph has been carrying a heavy burden of hurt and trauma and anger for decades. When he reveals the truth to his brothers and says, "I hold no grudge," he finally sets his burden down. Later in the parsha, when Jacob arrives in Egypt and reunites with his long-lost son Joseph, there are more tears of relief. As Jacob says, "Now I can die, having seen for myself that you are still alive." He doesn't die right then, but settles in Egypt along with his family in safety and security. This unhappy family actually gets a happy ending. For those of us who've lived in households characterized by abuse, neglect, betrayal, or cruelty, we might not be able to expect a happy ending, or even desire reconciliation with those who have hurt us. But for the unhappy families who are less broken than Jacob's, the story of Joseph and his brothers might bring us some hope. We hope that like Joseph, we can forgive our siblings for resenting us or treating us badly. We hope to forgive our parents for their failings, for playing favorites or stoking division, for putting their own needs ahead of ours. And like Joseph, we can reframe our past to see the pain and hurt our family members have caused, but not let that pain define or confine us. Joseph says to his brothers later, "Although you intended me harm, God intended it for good." Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes, "This single act of reframing allowed Joseph to live without a burning sense of anger and injustice. It enabled him to forgive his brothers and be reconciled with them. It transformed the negative energies of feelings about the past into focused attention to the future. We cannot change the past, but by changing the way we think about the past, we can change the future." One final thought about the hope that Joseph's story might give us. These brothers are estranged for decades, with no expectation that a reunion or reconciliation would ever take place. Whether by sheer luck or divine providence, they are brought back together for another chance to make things right. This opportunity was an unexpected gift to Joseph and his brothers. Joseph's act of grace was another gift to himself and his brothers, not to mention to the generations that would follow. So for those of us with difficult or broken relationships with our family members, we can still hope that repair is possible. If not now, then maybe one day. In this new year, may those who have happy families cherish them and never take them for granted. May those who have less than happy families find reconciliation and harmony. And may our Beth Am family find wholeness and happiness too. Shabbat Shalom. Happy New Year.